然后那啥，到做啥地方那做啥的了，那就那啥，给我原来准备过年做啥去吧的了的，看上是给我了技术依然去吧的，你去以后了。过了过说话的吧的地可虚弱，就是那给我了技术依然去的，商业的那古松土苏米原点的吧，这个这，的这个原点的这的，那讲就先把它年头的让家的这个原点的发展，这听那是白或者先别的那个商业原点的呢，商业的大些就等到了呀，这个。家居生的土地，把它错杀，那上就过往头，那上就过往头那样，对起来呀，去和报道没有过去呢，很多帮不是我去采访的，是的那个原来那个天气，或者像刚好过面的，就给他给完了就是一张去发去，的起来呀，这个上街个样，这个古松都有原点的个发展去，上街，这个。就现在他们就科学动画的专家呀，商业啥了呀，体验广播啊也，这个米些比毛牛毛把这个把赛瓦这个你专门那些人是，他原点专家，这个就人都马上把那子俩，去有可乐这个可乐去送过去噻去，好多现在去有可乐说话对吧？是可乐股啊，现在看上地。
Good morning. So last night we continued to look at the presentation in terms of the preparation to the actual meditation session, whereby one accumulates and purifies in order for one's meditation topic to quickly be attained or realized. And this is done in the preparation through the practice of the 7 limb prayer. We looked at 2 further steps there for accumulating merit. The first was rejoicing, and the second was requesting the wheel of Dharma to be turned. In terms of rejoicing, one calls to mind the many incredible qualities of beings such as Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, heroes and solitary realizers, recalling their many qualities and which they are either are developing, or in the case of Buddhas, have developed to the state of perfection. We recognize that in the case of Buddhas, but also the other great practitioners, they were once ordinary like us. But at one point, they heard teachings and decided, from this point on, I will strive to attain my goal. So from this, we take inspiration and rejoice. We also recognize the great benefit that in particular the Buddhas have been bringing to beings, in particular through teaching and guiding others. And thereby we rejoice in that too. And we recognize that they are assisted in these endeavors by the other great practitioners such as bodhisattvas, heroes and solitary realizers. Recognizing those great qualities, we rejoice too. And in this way, we accumulate extraordinary merit. We also recognize our own endeavors and rejoice in our own endeavors as well as those of ordinary beings, all of whom we are doing the best we can in terms of our own limited capacities. And thereafter we looked at the requesting for the wheel of Dharma to be turned. Here the request is made specifically to Buddhas that they teach and guide all these perfected qualities through the power of their compassion and wisdom, express those qualities to others, guiding beings perfectly in accordance with their own unique individual karmic predisposition and spiritual aspirations.
아니네 다들 추주콜로 고로세 소와데바세 다 추주콜로 고로세 추주콜로세 되라는 아주 가래람다 추주콜로 고로세도 마 송로시 쉬로와데 지단 추주콜로세 되리 아주 뭐 송야 되라 안 추주콜로 간네시에서는 바 무슈에 되라 가사 추주콜로 되라 안 룽기 추주콜 추콜세다 안 도베 추콜세 니용고레스 지다 룽기 추콜라는 산이 손비게 송디게 차사 최 손야게 도다기 송 차산의 lungu choore sore ane dobe choore sedi sanji sonbi cheti nga zhe nyamsu lenje nga zhula lam gyula gebi ge lam dige lam ji chasan dobe choore ese chasan da choore de la dobe choore da lungu choore so do shene ni songore.
Last night, when we were looking at requesting for the wheel of Dharma to be turned, we looked at the meaning of turning the wheel of Dharma. So firstly, we looked at that the teachings of the Buddha can be divided in different ways, one of which is into scriptural teachings and realized teachings. The scriptural teachings refer to the entire body of teachings from the Buddha, both sutra and tantra. Then, through hearing teachings and striving to cultivate them in and giving rise or generating paths within, those scriptural teachings are realized. And the realized teachings, or the realized Dharma, is the Dharma paths that beings have cultivated in their continuum.
And the Sangye Jumne Digi Chu Holo Tsagazu Gobar Hesne, Chu Holo Sar Sumgor, Rawa Dambo, and Deshi Chugor, and Bawa, and Nikasore, Sheshin Ye, and Tama, Singing Baby, Singing Baby Chugor, Chugan about Sumgor, Dambola Deshi Chugor, or Dembashi Gor Sonroa, or Bawa de la, and Sheshin, so Sheshin Yido. Sheshin Yido. Sheraje Parudo Shimba, Sherchin Sura, Dordune, Sherchin Sura, the Tompan Yugo Sonroa, Warana Salea, Somba de Roa, Tamala, Lebanaba Shivido, Sorda, the Lebanaba Semten Balea Son de Money, and the Sonia de Lea, Yang Bachelo, or Tika Sonroa, Jichu Rimba Sum Go Regere. That you call Rimba Summa, the Goyo Marwa, San Jimnedic, that didn't see the end of the Jing and show you call said the Carja San Yi, Sum be chet, and Jichu you call in Sumruada. Che Kor in La Rua, Chisa San Yi Che Mango Sar Mango Sung or Wada Mango Sung or Wada, and the San Yi Sundin Che Yukola Sar Sung Go, Segim in the other Che Yukola Pado Mebo Go to Wasabi, Dayaji Samturajik Yungrua. Che Yukola San Yi Che Mango Sung Rua, then Che Yukola Sar Mambo Gorwada. Bezinan Che Yukola Sar Sung Gorwa. Chuko Sumgas Gazicoras and Sarasumgoras, Dambo Kawakoras and the Waranas Luko Regere. Niba the Kawakoras and the Gaswar, Dambo the Kawakos Waranas, Niba the Jagu Pumbori, somebody and the Passa Yang Bajans, or Delico Resore. Says now Chuyuko Rimba Sumgo Regere. That Chuyuko Rimba Sumgo and that Jualigua, Chuyuko Rimba Sumado go and Dili Tsigi Marwa, Sanji Chu Patomeba Sung Yorwa, Chisa Chu Yukola Jatama course, Tongrama course was, Chisa Garsene Chu Yukolo to the Sanji Sung di Sung Chasa Chu Yukola Chegura, Sanji Chu Delia, and Sung at the Patomeba Sung Yorwada. Chisa Chu Yukola Patomeba Gor Yorwa, Chisa Chu Yukola Rimba Sum Gor said, taking me news, Dili Rimba Patomeba Gor and the Chisares and began the nigger some Sunguru than the Dobarish.
The turning of the wheel of Dharma, in terms of the teachings from Buddha Shakyamuni, we would have heard of the presentation of there being 3 turnings of the wheel of Dharma. The first was given at Varanasi, where the 4 Noble Truths were extensively presented. The second was second turning of the wheel of Dharma was at Vulture's Peak. And there the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, the presentation on emptiness, was taught. And the third turning of the wheel of Dharma, as a translator, I don't remember the place's name, Geshe said it in Tibetan, but I don't remember the translation. Anyway, so the third turning of the wheel of Dharma was specifically or primarily on the Chittamattran presentation. So here a doubt may arise, because the Buddha gave innumerable teachings, but all of those teachings here are being said to be included just in 3 turnings of the wheel of Dharma. But how can that be when there were so many teachings given? Surely the wheel of Dharma was turned continuously, not just 3 times.
Jeramawana Chidu Ducha, Jeramawan Dodebala Sungore, Chesanzo Chedu Ducha, Jeramawan Dodebala. This one in the Diga Soda, Jike Sangbala Sobi Chuyu Kolo Koro Chia, Shuichine, and the Segi Kolola Soba pu an che yu holo ko ra che shu de ne an ji be che ko lo ko ra se ne be ji ga so ri ge da ma so ne be zha wa shu chi 친 바래 진내된 최슈가 망고 슈지 뒤버 첨부 슈치가 망고 좀네 지 뒤버 직 중어래 와 지자디 콜로 담보 추유 콜로 고로제 바르나슬레 추유 콜로 고로제 제상예 슈 는 상예 추유 콜로 시진나데 추유 콜로 고그레 세베게다 직 대사에나다 디비날 파 캡라 슈 등고로 어디 나신 캡라 슈 친바래 진제네다 링이샹다 샹다네 주주의 견자 좀 받아 대서 차상 안 최슈와 이거래 다대 최슈와 루고래 선바직 뒤버침보 빼 초침보 슈치 중으로와 내내게 인자 안 최기 홀러린 바 당보세데 니 당보샤바래 난 디나시 니버디아나 와르나슬리아 아니 셰싱이도스 너 동반 이거 그냥 송바라와 제사 동반 이거 그냥 송바래 뭐 소송해야 돼 제사 셰디 체드제비 두자 제주세바 타과 침배 가사를 송거와 와르나 송해야 돼 제사 디급소 아직 그냥 최기 콜라들의 상이게 셰싱이 동반 이거 송거라 선데네 양즉 빼직 망고 쉬우지 안 두셔 좀 전에 지게 배능아서 뒤고하지 나지 넘긴 결함지 손쉬어 뉴유지 뒤고하지도 소화침 무슈리기도 어디 나시 저 가져갈는 최년가 내가 뒤버침 무슈 좀 말아 어디 나신 담아 다 샘점비고라 다 샘점비고 디 손에디 가르리 오르세네 뒤워실래 말이 다 상jel이야 결혼기 와르나슬레 최송도 안최 담제 덴바 주바 나지 송구도스 아니 결혼기 와라나슬야 아니 직 셰신 도선비가로 최담제 아니 라신이 말도 덴바 마주 송구도스 제산 결혼기 칙니레 결혼을 가와스요 말레스 노트요 말레스 이냥 아주 때나 당보들의 덴바 주바로 송 아니 마오 니베들의 덴바 마주바레스도 디니 가와로 통구도스 안디 가르제네 송와레스 주어지고 바로 어다디 디위기 렌델이야 마산 유송야 디게 지금 송여도 레버 넘버 쳐와서 디스 마 셈점발 셈점배 따와 송는 걸 때디가서 진짜 셈점발 마선 데네에 디급소 아직 초 뒤버치 뭐 슈슈래 진짜 데네에 숨 중화자 디숨들의 최유콜로 걸와서데 명디 탄이 제발에 진짜 상이게 최송자 탐제 데네게 뒤버치 뭐요 말 가실래 미직니를 봐 최송야 용거래 가실래 미자라서 미 가실래 미 가시도 송야 용거로 와 진짜 상이게 최송야 되 감다 매바다 데네가 두 스페드 가브리엘이야 아니 상예 헬라 데네 슈디가 다 헬라 최 데네 데레야 최송제 데네 송야게 최 어두스네 망고 용거로 와 진짜 데네게 좀더 마와 아니 제예 제가 마와던 너데발 체르죠 조올 선배 되네기 최선야가 warna son여도 배지 초침뭐 뒤버침뭐 슈제다 마선 대상마선에 즉 자기한테 캡라다야 되어 말데 이내 되네기 돈을 파 깨라신 뭐 슈체네 누시네 가서를 사용 개발하나 사고로 요바나 차벌 해시래 사용 제대사 구교 땅으로와 제자 상익이 최 승구를 했을 때 깨닫기는 되네 구교 땅만한 차교를 해제래 제자 어두시네 뒤버침부 초와침부 슈제 차르숨 중제 아니 제자 당보들라 샘점바 가서 제라마던 도대비기 좀다 따르기 고송 니바들라 아니 가서래 체도저와 태바침비 가서 사모동반이 라신이 마주베 따르기송 다 손바델라 아니 샘점비게 따르되 송어도 제자디네게 따르도 송하자다 디숨바델라 최고림바 숨고와레스네 언두시네 송어레다 주에디레 마도 최다 현다데게레 최송제등도 최규콜로 고와세디 타니 라구오 말데뉴 뉴도 최규콜로레 송바레네 최규콜로 고와레스 타니데 제고 말레
So whilst it certainly is correct that the Buddha gave many or almost innumerable teachings, of the teachings given in our world, they are presented in a way of three distinct turnings of the wheel of Dharma. So what we should understand is that whilst there are three distinct turnings of the wheel of Dharma, it doesn't mean that the Buddha only taught 3 times, because we know he taught many more times than that. But a variety of differing teachings would have been included within each wheel turning. So the Buddha, he taught on many occasions, often to large communities, but sometimes to a very small community. For example, if he was invited to a home for a meal, and then after the meal he would give a teaching. So that community or that gathering would have been relatively small. But at other times, there are many thousands or tens of thousands of beings would have gathered for teachings. So the Buddha did give many teachings, but the way that they were combined into three distinct wheel turnings is primarily in terms of the intended audience, the primary audience, and therefore the topic, as well as the location of the principal teaching within each of those wheel turnings. So the first wheel turning, which was that at Varanasi, there the Buddha presented the Four Noble Truths primarily in accordance with the philosophical view of the Vaibhashika and Tsongkhapa. Here then, many people or many beings who were receptive to the philosophical tenets of Vaibhashika and Tsongkhapa, they gathered for those teachings. Later, the Buddha taught primarily at Vulture Peak. There he taught on emptiness, the perfection of wisdom teachings. And these were the primary audience were Arya Bodhisattvas. And there the view of emptiness was presented in accordance with the Madhyamaka. And then thirdly, when the third wheel turning was taught, this was in response to questions. So the questions were, but Buddha, we have deep trust in you. We know you speak honestly, you speak the truth. But your teachings at Varanasi presented that phenomena exist truly. But then at your teachings at Vulture's Peak, you presented that phenomena are empty of existing truly. How is this not contradictory? Please clarify your intended meaning. And the Buddha responded, and the way he responded then established the philosophical tradition of the Chittamatrans. So the way the Buddha then, this is how the three wheel turnings came about. That first wheel turning, the way the Buddha taught the topics of the Four Noble Truths, were in accordance with what later became the Vaibhashika and Tsongkhapa philosophical views. And when the collection of teachings that were primarily given at Vulture's Peak, and primarily for Arya Bodhisattvas, there the topic of emptiness was presented in accordance with what later would become the Madhyamaka view. And when it was clarified, the apparent discrepancies were clarified later. This was clarified in a way that later became the Chittamatran view. And furthermore, where the location of the primary teaching was given, at that location, a large number, an immense number of beings came together for those teachings. Hence, that location became what was considered the primary location. So, for example, His Holiness most regularly teaches in Dharamsala, but when he gives a Kalachakra, say in Bodh Gaya, immeasurably more people come for that. So similarly, when the Buddha gave the primary teaching associated with each wheel turning, that place where the primary teaching was given became known as, for example, the first wheel turning was given at Varanasi. But there were many other teachings associated, or that became associated with the first wheel turning, that were given at venues other than Varanasi, and likewise with the second and third wheel turning.
choju shindu nyangale dasul temba namla ro namla pemba dan devi chirdu ani shingi du charapki changda nyambi kawa dan kalbar nyangale mitawar shubor sowa dabawos.
Let's continue with where we concluded last night. So on the handout, we're in the middle of page 55. In the published book, we on the middle of page 49. So just before I read from what Geshe said, to repeat what has been said before, these root verses from the King of Prayers are not in the original Tibetan, so when Geshe reads a text, he doesn't read the root verse, but he'll come to it later. So likewise, I'll be skipping the root verse. So looking at the text, supplication is set forth in the stanza, and then Lama Tsongkhapa's commentary immediately below. Supplicate those throughout the 10 directions who show how to pass beyond sorrow to remain not passing into nirvana for as many eons as the number of, this should maybe be changed to minute particles, not dust, a number of minute particles there are in the universe in order to bring about the benefits and happiness of sentient beings.
다리네 직지지데 냥한 다된 강시 시소 직지지데 시데다 직지지데 가르네 냥한 다된 강시 대달라 조군나 펜신 대비실 가바 신이 등유 슈버장 다게 탈모라죠 소어 이세 직지디레.
And then the quoted verse from the King of Prayers, I supplicate with palms joined in prayer, those wishing to demonstrate their final nirvana. Please stay as many eons as there are atoms to benefit and bring happiness to all beings.
상계디 지다 된나바 상계려야 아니 뭐려야 아니 지 나라조이나 지게 바 아미기 되네 바 라오메바 지코 시르고로와 제상은저 시에디 안조이나 시에디 수관계 가투여요 말와 가서는 시에게 견섬되도 안 수관계 가마도 바지 가야 도야 말 시주고래 제가 라와성한줄 시와래 라와 메바자 당아 주미다 제라다 미다 둔조다 다 코와바 차산티네기 라와 메바 시주고래 제가 상계라 아는 오라 다 균 탐지 지게 방차 연단도 저 토사와인자 아니 시에디 요마르다 상계리아 지 야야 사바 제와리세다 시세데 되는 뭐네 된다 발라야 상실의 시와 요 말이지 매바 이나야 냥한 다된 시대 냥한의 대비 수된 거래지 냥한의 대비 수된 거래 뭐니 된다 발라 냥한 시에매 시다 냥한 다와세다 가지 시에서 마시는 시와시로와 제가 되니기 냥한의 다와디 수된 거래 냥한 다된 가시에서 마시로 제서다 마시바지 주로 제려거든 하지래 소와디스 겨 마시바지 주로 제려거라 제사다 상계라는 상계의 시여 여르베랍나 된남발라 상계 시와요 말해서 제사 매래서 이나야다 시위 수된 거래 제래 양한의 대비 수된 거 대시에서 마시는 시와시로 시에서는 양한의 대바시고
Looking at the verse, then the first line of the Tibetan is our second line, those wishing to demonstrate their final nirvana. Those then, the term those refers to the Buddhas, because the Buddhas are remarkable beings, completely different from ourselves. We were all, as ordinary beings, were born from our parents, and we progress through our life, and at some point we will all die. And this death that will come to all of us is something that cannot be averted. We can try and live a healthy life and therefore a longer life, but death will come and it cannot be averted. And it cannot be averted because we have no control over our death. If we had control, we could avert death as long as we wanted. But we are without freedom. Our death will fall to us. And this is the case not just for us, not just for humans, but for all sentient beings. For all ordinary beings. Buddhas are completely different. They have abandoned the causes that lead to uncontrolled death. They can show their death and choose to leave this body and progress elsewhere. They can do so under their own control. Hence here we request that they do not die. Then just to say as a translator, what we have translated here as final nirvana is fine, that's what it says. But Geshe says the meaning here, because the word for final nirvana is also an honorific term for dying. So if you were to request a High Lama, or in this case reference a Buddha, not to die, you would be asking them to not pass into nirvana. So here the way we should understand to demonstrate the final nirvana is more simply not to demonstrate dying, not to demonstrate passing from this world.
That is Nyangal Deba Lamna Nyangdes, Nyangal and Yomo Balagorwa. The Nyangal Deba said, Yomo Deba and Yomo Pamba Sigore. Chida Nyangdes, Yomo Pambe Pambo, Goten de la Nyangdes logo on the Muchidana, Nyangde, said Nyangde Ladu, Nyangal Deba said, Yomo Pampa, Judgment says Gugorda, Chidan and the Mune. Nyangal Deba Sidu, Chida Nyangan said Yomo, but Deba Meva Seva Sigura. Chida Yomo, Meva Sudu, Yomo Pamparava, Pons on the judgment Bachasora, Chida Nyangal Deba Chana, Karuoda judgment in Kugore, Chida Nyangal Deba, Nyangal Deba, Dumba, judgment go to body, Dungore, Sachi, sick dinner, some corner, did go Sigua, Chida Nyangde, Chida, no meaning of the Yangde, Sidu Karuko, Yomo, Pampa, Sach Kugore. Chida de la Jachumba said Yungre, Chida Yangde said, Chidane, the Gugure. That then Yangde said, Yomo Pangba said the Gugu Marada. That did Yangde said, as the Yomo Wanga Rami by Shiva de, and they said David Sutan Passer. Yangan Deba, Yangan de said that she will suit him, but she has a shuna, Yangan Deba, Lama loss of Shiva de la Shes should do. Nyangal Deba, yes, or Tangan to do Shes should. Just that I did Langanzuki, Shiva said Gugore, that sick court Raparo Chena. She said Shiva said, she said that young day Shiva did that. As the Yomo be one get round, maybe Shigur, what Yangan said to Yomo Bache, Deba see. Di Rame that you about the Meba Seshabat. She said that I was in the Mung house to make you but the Yomo Wongi Rame by Shitu. She said Sanjela the Yomo Rame by Shiva do Yomar the inner Dinig Sudin Gore. She said that Dondala Yangal Mideva Soa Deba said Mashiva Shuruji Gormado Yandi said Yomo Pompe Pongpa Tarpa said Gogo did Lagoma that Sigro did on the Chibor which Sigro Chibor later and Tuya in Yadwade.
The term nirvana, the Sanskrit word nirvana in English, is translated as gone beyond sorrow. What is the meaning of sorrow here? Sorrow refers to the afflictions. So it's the afflictions that one has gone beyond. And gone beyond, so if sorrow means the afflictions, gone beyond, it means to have ceased them or destroyed them or eliminated them completely. And that is referring to the state of nirvana. So the state of nirvana is the state, and where we're expressing it in different ways, where one has destroyed the afflictions completely, or where one has gone beyond sorrow, gone beyond the afflictions, because one has eradicated the afflictions. And usually this is used in the context of foe destroyers or arhats. So therefore, this term that we have translated here in the Sanskrit, nirvana, this is what the word is, but it's usually used in the context of foe destroyers or arhats. And again, what it means is having attained the state of nirvana means one has destroyed the afflictions and therefore gone beyond sorrow, gone beyond the afflictions. But the meaning in the context of the seven limb prayer is not the literal word for nirvana, but rather the honorific word, which means for not to die. So there are in Tibetan several different words for death, and this would be the highest form. So it's used in relation to Buddhas or to one's lamas, requesting that they do not die. So if one was to put this in a coarse way, which in Tibetan would sound quite disrespectful, it would be asking not to die. And that is the meaning in this line.
Nyangan Dadu Gashi, Chisadiniki, that Nyangali Tishi Dadonala, and she was said, Shesama Shuvena, Sangelia, Ranshin Yukodonaba, she was said, Your Marete, in Adiniki, she will Tsutun go edge, Nyangaletibe, Nyangan Dadu, Nyangalet Tsutun Baz, this order.
Just to say then again, that here the meaning is requesting the Buddhas to not, put it in English more politely, not pass beyond this life, not to move on. You put it very literally, coarsely, do not die. Do not demonstrate death, rather. Do not demonstrate death. Because the understanding is very clear. Buddhas have control over their birth and death. So therefore, it will be a demonstration of death. It's something that they would choose.
Denegi Dushine Sungorwa. Dine Zada, Yangali Sutumba Sedu, Dan Zugi, Pene Chike, Sanjum Dente, Sanjum de that Gomba Tower, Yangali Deva, Jingan Zugi, that Sutumba is a said the Tavachin Bugi Kansa, Jiki Sunare, the Sugida, Dumba Sanjum de. Yangali Sutumba is or that Sutumba is it. Zada Sutumba is it, that Sutumba is it, Dumbasangi Jim de me, Kiawa Lembic, Sutumilia, Kiawa Latin Tushin and Pa, Chiki, Yangali Sushi, Yangali Sutumba is. That didn't go by the Gimzaga said that. Did it don't go Yomara and did Sangela do number Kiawa that because a Chiwa Mena and Chiwa around top Sarah, and Tsudungo came into us, the Christian Dungo research, Jewish Lirua. Tis a Duja thousand genum, Duja thousand gen, Dagpatsin you can Duja, Semgen, Duja thousand gen the Gilia, thousand doni, Midapig, low to shake egg, Dondalea, and she will Tsudungo regere. Cesada Carasena Sangi Gombo Soviet Tsuduna, Danga, or the Sangi in there. Yamler Shu, Jedinishi Chevene, Sangi in a round by Shidudua, she's an answer that she do Rechipareta, she do and Mitaba. Another 1,000 doy, Tapazim, 1,000 doy, and the pay on the Mashi Unico Duggers, 1,000 doy, Dondala, Dichido, and Mitaba Jag, Mitaba Lodi, Lolipa, Lodipa, Mitaba Temple, Lolipa, Locula Kiwa, Kiwi, Dondalia, Suitum Pares, she said, that, all that. Nyam Majapaina, and she Nimachi Shiru, Sange in a Sange, the Lama Digizine, Shiru, she's setting on the Shi in Barawa, she's that in his other, Jake, Tapatimbu Yomares, Mitaba Tayag, Tandalaya, and to Chegi, Nyamlendi, Yaga, Tandalia, to Shin Sutungo, SS somewhere.
From Buddha Shakyamuni's life story, we know that he was born into this world, and then many decades later, he died. So what we know from the Mahayana presentation, the Mahayana philosophical tenets presentation, is that Buddhas have have control over their death. They are not like us, whose death is beyond our control. So the question then will come, why did the Buddha show death? Why did he show the aspect of dying? And in fact, we can take it further to any Buddha and our spiritual teachers. Why do they show the aspect of dying when they have gone beyond uncontrolled death and they have control over whether they die or not? Well, they do so in order to benefit their students. Because for students who are not highly developed, we are still dominated by grasping at permanence, at taking phenomena that are in their very nature impermanent and grasping, or in their very essence as impermanent, grasping at them as being permanent. Or to express it maybe more colloquially, relating to things that are impermanent as if they were permanent. And this is a major impediment to students striving to cultivate the Dharma within themselves. Because we live under the delusion of there being time. So to challenge us to shake their students awake from this stupor of ignorance, the Buddhas and our teachers show that even they pass from this world. And that is to wake their students up to the inevitability of their own decline and death. And that too can come about suddenly and unexpectedly. And thereby, through showing this example, the teacher is skillfully shaking their students awake from their stupor of ignorance and to encourage them to use what remains of this life to develop the Dharma within.
안 상기베 가와 제바다 데네 깔레 잡 데네게 안 상기베 취된 바래 마도 녀만의 상기 차와래서 올다가 저기 탑 첨비게 가사기 시다되게 진짜 상기 차와래 진짜다 상기베 취된 베네 가와 로주 가와 제베 취된 데네 상기베 취 베네 당한 저기 제바 중이 세치셔 저와 제바 중이 진짜다 당보 김베게 취된 네 지금 주모래게 취된 데네 마지 안 닝보 매바 통하지네 안에 야 랍도 준비 제 데네 안에 가와제 다 검제 제 가와제 데네 안에 상계비게 출퇴 온도시 지서 출퇴 버리마도 니만니만에 상계 사와래서 올다 진짜 디 안데 디된 거 봐대 가래 랍도 다야 제산 당보 아주 김나 김이별 그래서 제 주무게 갑도 셰비게 출퇴도 내려야 안 강아요 바데 닝보 매바데니시 통네 안 랍중 수도 바로 제상 안 졸려 데니고 코위기 최대래 주투 셰베나 안 코와라 타요 말에 제자 닝보요 말에서 랍중시고래서 랍도 수도 다 랍중 제바 잠기 안 타바고 토투고래 토구 말에서 띵에제 곰자고래서 제자다 곰치고 냐냐 잡되면 잠기 촉사 집자 맞제나 디안데 산요고 말했네. 데네 띵에 로루 까와체네. 배 감보 데네 양지 제려 샤라 최체네 수에체네. 데네 엄마서 상기부 수도 어두스체네 제고레스. 데다 띵에 진직부 검자냐 데디베 상기 투에 디안 투고 말했네. 디 수디 띵에 질래 야추 샹제 데네 샤라 최라 데네게 잡아뛰. 데네 상기베 잡아뛰 말했체. 이제 두스제데 드라다나 마소는 냠는 두스체 코발이야 안 저게 두스체네 닝보요 말텔야 코발에 발려진다 타바드냐진다 된두신 타바드냐진 냠는제 되네야 냠는제 봐서는 띵이제 곱시네도 곰잡 곰잡 될야 초사 니게团는 두스 상기 고고래서 두스체네 상기 고고래서 두스체네 양안줄야 진 냠는제장 림벌 마선 두스체 고래서 지 된바래 시제 취된바래서 송고래
The general account of the Buddha's life story that one knows, this is in accordance with the Theravada tenets. The Mahayana tenets present a different account. The presentation from the Mahayana tenets perspective is in terms of the life story of the Buddha in North India. That would be the same. But the primary difference is that the being that was born as Prince Gautama, he had already attained enlightenment lifetimes before. He chose to take rebirth at that time, that place, to those parents. And he came into this world an enlightened being. And now to understand the reasons why is quite useful. In that, through living on one hand an ordinary life, but on the other hand, really an exceptional life in amongst human beings, in that he had all the greatest of comforts and pleasures that a human could strive for. He was a prince, he was married, and only later he turned away from that. So he showed this because he showed that the joys of wealth, of power, of prestige, as well as the joys of having a family. These are the greatest joys that people strive for in their everyday lives. It's what motivates people. And he showed that there is no essence to this, there is no lasting happiness, there is no great meaning to any of these activities, or in his case, all of them, in that he was royalty, he had wealth and power, he had prestige and fame, and he had a loving family. But even having the very best of worldly circumstances, he came to recognize that there is no great purpose, no great meaning there. There is something far greater than that. And this then he showed when he turned away from ordinary life and he went forth into the forest and engaged in deep meditation. So there he was showing disenchantment or renunciation for the ordinary pleasures of life, recognizing that they have no real essence. And he did so as to encourage later generations of students, both those in his lifetime and those for centuries that would follow. Moreover, then also in terms of the process of spiritual development that he displayed, he went for a number of years of engaging in extreme austerities, focusing on the development of concentration, where he became, we know from the life story accounts, that became emaciated. There he was displaying to students in that lifetime and lifetimes to come that concentration alone, no matter how powerful, and no matter with what mental bliss arises or physical bliss arises, that is not, or that too lacks essence, and that too is not the final goal. There is something far beyond that. So he also then showed that for the sake of students. Then he went forth from that situation and displayed enlightenment in Bodh Gaya. So all these varying stages of his life story he presented to show different people that what you consider the pinnacle of your ambitions, such as worldly success or spiritual success in terms of concentration, these are quite mundane. You have a capacity far beyond this. The actual meaning, the actual purpose is far beyond this. And he showed that then with attainment of enlightenment. But to achieve enlightenment, which in his case was done many lifetimes before, required concerted and sustained endeavor over eons, accumulating merit, accumulating wisdom, and thereby eventually attaining enlightenment.
Sanskrit 추기증에 되게 송고래 도스네 송고래 지금 당한 저기에다 태면 봤을 때는 저 발리기 추기증에 저기 갈 송고라스네 상예 점내 대기 당보 마도시도 구조디 나도 나지 찍부지게 안에서 올다 나야 여봐 차야 여봐 아니 저곧 되네기 추이된 봤어야 돼 킬링 거 말에 제가 상보 추이된 봐 대지 상기비 추이된 바를 상예만 이제 차와서 저와디 다 발리 추기 중에 추이된 바를 해야 돼 킬링 거 말. 와르나서 오늘은 안지게 가와치네 안지 도리지안에 상문에 당보게 디겨서 개발해서 상개발에 되네 상개는 도시 추고선 되네 공부 줘발해서 제가 라와메바 시도발해서 시발해서 공부 줘발해서 어도시네 디 안저 시바나진 상유 좀 데야 아니 고 뒤수 맞지도 라와요 말고 류디바 제베자시 오래 시소래서 제산디 도시네 송고 제다디 나데디 상예리아 안된다발이야 시와요 말데이네 시비 추든고래 세지 냥알데베 추든바래 세야디 아니 가소데 산스키키 추기진베기 간사디기디바 송다제 아니 발리 추기진베기 간사디기 좀나마디기 임바나 안데네 송고 추든바래세 마레스 냥알데베 원네라 냥알데베 요레스 냥알 데사와르데 도마샤게도 냥알데 데사와레세 오르와다 제자다 냐마 Dembashake to you, Gubuti, and Antonashi, Chipitika, Nayoba, Tayoba, and the Duktin Pumbo, Duktis, or Leda Numoji, Duktin Pumbore, Jesa, the Ramaba, she was, she said, she was, and Dusen, that's so not, then she said, just killing Dagoma, Sonati.
What I've just presented then is the understanding of the historical Buddha Shakyamuni, in accordance with it can be expressed in different ways, the Mahayana tenets view, or the view of the Sanskrit tradition. The Pali tradition, or the view in accordance with the Tibetan tenets, which is quite different. So the actual life story, the events, there's no dispute. But the dispute, not the dispute, but the different presentation would be that according to the Pali tradition, the Buddha was born into this world in an ordinary body that's subject to uncontrolled birth, aging, sickness, and death. His body was an illustration of a true suffering. And having an ordinary body no different from ourselves, he engaged in the activities as presented in the life story of the Buddha. And when his life came to an end, without any control over the process of death, his death rather befell him in the same way that it will befall us. And in this way, the Buddha died, or to use the honorific, the Buddha passed into nirvana. So the difference is, in the Sanskrit tradition, or the philosophical tenets of the Mahayana, the Buddha attained enlightenment long before he took birth as Prince Gautama, and that process of birth was something he had control over, and his body was not a true suffering. And similarly, when his death came, that was a process that he chose, he had complete control over. So that is where the difference is between the presentation of the two traditions, the Sanskrit and the Pali.
Simja Tamje, Yawa Chima, the Tarba, the Tamje, go on to be Lam Yamle, Pembiki, Chirdu, and ya Gawa Shingi Badushu, Bene Chiki, Junju Shuroshe, Sachipa Shugorda, David Chirkar, Shuroshe said, Shugu, Gumzen, the Garelamna, Manzulia Payaji Chidu, Manzule Pemba, and Dewa Yagich, David Dondalia Shuroche, or what.
That then was referencing the first line of the verse, which was the second, those wishing to demonstrate those wishing to demonstrate death, and referring to the Buddhas. Then the verse continues, and the second line of the Tibetan is our final line, to benefit and bring happiness to all beings. So here all beings is all sentient beings, or all migrators, literally migrators. So therefore, the Buddhas are being requested not to die, but to remain in our world. So that now, the third line in the Tibetan, our third line, please stay for as many eons as there are atoms. In other words, please do not die. Continue to remain here for an inconceivable length of time. Why? So as to benefit sentient beings, to benefit suffering beings.
Dāni kāsi duyā shūgō rāsana kāwā shīngi duñi shūgō rā yāngsa, kāwā shīngi, kāwā chīna ngā dzūgī dā, kāwā chīngi sā dzē shūgō rā, dīnā shī dā shīngi duñi sā, shūngi duñi chāngdā ñāmbi kē, dūsū dīnī gyūngi mū shūgō shē sā chī kūgō rā dā, dūsū kācī bā dū shūgō rā, lō chīk tuyō rā, lō jātā mā tuyō tuyō rā sā dā, bē māngbō duñi, kābi kē shīngi duñi chāngdā ñāmbi kē dūsū dīnī shī lā tuyō rā shē sā chī.
And for how long? So this is our third line. For as many atoms, as exist, for that length of time stay. So this is just a poetic expression of stay and always stay. Never depart. Never show your death. So just to say on the translation, because the same term is later translated as in the commentary below as fine dust. So that's not necessarily mistaken, but Geshe says it's more correct to use atoms rather than dust, because dust is something dirty, but atoms is also far more pervasive.
Dene yue de Junuba dene Shuro Chie said that Dine Junubu Shuba do our career lana, Manzule Pemba than Divichi to Inserua. Chesandang, draw Kunla, draw Semjan Tam Jele Pemba than Divichi. To the Pemba than Divichi, San Yu Jumne, you choose on Yamling Rimba Pa, Sung Chang Anzul, Shuba, and Anzul Yamling Rimbati there. Chesan Denigi Tingu, Anzuki Yamlin Chedu, Anzulia, Dangan, Chige. Chudum Soya, Sobocomia, Tundre Sumia, the Niki Jim, Passion to be Yamlentia, Chajosemomia, Jamni Jocomia, Deni Gombigi, Yamlentia, Deni Yamlin batting on the Kiedu, Anzuli Pemba said, Pemba ting Anzuli Dingo, Digi, Pemba Secarson, Digi, Jehu, Mahobana, Rajan, Tamjo Korea, Dungal trade, Dingi, Deva Tobia. Deva to a Jungora, Chesa, Pempada, and Deva City, Seti Devada, Dingi, and Seti Deva, and Deva Chimada, Dingi Deva Tarbata Tamjikim, Dido Nalea, Manzulia, Cheson Shuro Ches or Dagaji, Shugoadi, Manzulia, Pemba, Deva, Manzudiam, Jewod, Manzushin Godu, Chesa Dishin, Manzulia, Lapan Lamdo Judge Godu, Chesan Kurama, the Mendu Kura di Suche, Manzulia. Manzulia di Yamling Rimbat Pa Lap, Yamlin Duenche, Manzulia, Duslaroche, Shuroche, Desangan Yamlin Jeje, Yamlin Chevana, Manzukula, Topa Giri, the Jevana, and Sedile Devada, Jevachimada, Tarvata, Tingi Devati, Top Tugures, and Didonale Shuroche, said that she soon Changanzula to Shuroche, said the Gawashin to Shugo Semjan Tamji, Sanjugo Matu Yibadu. Chagruada, because Dadan Anzu in a media, Tare, Science and Shubin, also Shuada, Gover. That many Dundro Dang, Dachi, Yawa Bada, Ida, that is Science and Shumu Shutumarwa. Then Kondoya, Ya Jama, Jawa Lenchen, Tada Miu go on like Tobiadu, then Cheshire go Ragua. Chesa Sanyu, Gundu Mashuben, Pesovena, Kondoya, Romang Vichele, Miki Walimba, Science and Cheshire go Ragua Marwa. Chesa Sanye di Koa Madon Bardo, Pekaba, Denigi, Shuvena, da Kondoya, Romang Vichele, Miki Walendu. Sanye should do better, Sanye in the Shushia go Bragorba. The dinner is other, Dondala, and Semjan Tam, Jokoa, Sanje Govan, Sanjo Govan, Mato Yubado, Chasa Mato Yubado, and Shuroshi, Sajiguruada, Shuroshi, Chesa Dagi, Talmorajo, Soaki, said me and the Ya, and Chigilani, Tamajo, Lugi, when we do Chetovia, and Shuroshi, Shurochesna, and the Shuye. Dagi Talmorajo, so he said, Chesa Dirua, Dagi Tamolani, Tamojaje, and Jesemgi Deva, another Lagi, Tamoja, Lu, Gubitonea, and the Shues or that.
The final line in Tibetan is our first line. I supplicate with palms joined in prayer. Here, in this limb of the seven limb practice, one is making supplications with our body, speech, and mind. The body is the activity of bringing our hands together. The speech is the recitation of a verse such as this. And then the mental engagement, the most important of all of this, is that for the purpose of benefiting all migrators, all suffering sentient beings, all of us, please remain. So this is the purpose which we should generate within us, with a clear understanding that the reason we want the Buddhas to remain is to benefit sentient beings. To, how does the text say? To benefit and bring happiness, to benefit and bring happiness. And the meaning of that should be clear to us in our mind when making this request. What we are essentially requesting is that the Buddhas remain so as to guide us to cultivate the graduated stages of the path to enlightenment in our own continuum. And when we say in our own continuum, in the continuum of all sentient beings, because we have the understanding that the way Buddhas benefit sentient beings is to teach them the Dharma, and not only to teach, not merely to impart knowledge, but to skillfully guide beings, encouraging them and skillfully showing them how to give rise to the actual paths of the Dharma within their own continuum. And this is the method that leads to the lasting happiness of liberation and enlightenment. This is what we are requesting, or why we are requesting the Buddhas to remain, and also knowing that through training us and us striving in the way they are teaching us, we will not only be progressing towards the attainment of the lasting happiness of liberation and enlightenment, but we'll also achieve temporary happiness through having more subdued minds now, achieving good rebirths, and so forth. So this is the purpose behind our joining of our palms and making this request verbally and mentally. And in terms of the duration, we have that in our third line, for as many eons as there are atoms. So here we are requesting for the Buddhas to remain, to guide us, to gain realizations. So we're asking them to teach us and skillfully encourage us to cultivate the Dharma within, and to remain until each and every sentient being has attained enlightenment. Because whilst we now, these fortunate beings who are making this request, we have a precious human rebirth, we can directly benefit from the Buddhas. There are countless human beings, as well as those suffering in the lower realms, or those in God realms such as in the formless realm, who cannot access the teachings of the Buddha. They cannot be directed in how to cultivate paths within. So therefore, we are requesting the Buddhas to remain not until throughout the length of my lifetime, but until each and every sentient being has attained enlightenment, so beyond those human beings with a precious human rebirth, but until even those who do not have a precious human rebirth eventually do remain, and remain until samsara is completely emptied. In other words, each and every being has gone beyond the sorrow of their own afflictions. This then is the meaning behind this supplication.
In my Lamrim see the draw namla pembadan TV Shirdo Sede, that's on yin Shue de Caridon Shures, Nang draw Semjalia Pembadan TV to Shuroshi, the Pembadan TV said, Anzulia, and Jam Ninja Jashu Sem Curon, Yamle Chepan, Yamle, Duba years, the Nigin Yamli Topang and Zuli Kiu Dus, Chazan Diki Dandala, Curon Chu, Song Chianzula, Lupton Shuroches, Chazan the Nigin that Setelia Digitan, Di Dingy, Deva Tarpat, Tamjiki Bokoba, Toba, Topu, Di Dandalia, and Curon Dus and Shuroches, I did, Lady Dandadi, Shesavati Tarvat. And draw them like Pemba than David Shirdu, Sedoa. That Dambo, that Garichel to sugar isn't Dio the sugar, Echede. Da Gazeba the sugar, Elana, sing you do Charvitana and Yamba, and the Gavan, Yangali Mida or Shuso, said sing you Choji, sing you do Tana, do Charvitana and Yambigi, and the Nigi Universe in the Shurochi, Sachi, on those sing you do Charvitana and Yamba. Nyambike kawa nyangalimida or shubo so sheshu so adingi lani temochi and semki deba dan kuishepti todina shuguyesasti.
Coming to Lama Tsongkhapa's commentary below, the meaning is the same as I've just presented in terms of the actual verse, but to go through it briefly. So as a translator, I'll go through it in the same order as the Tibetan, which is how Genda taught it, so the order is a little different. So it starts with, throughout the 10 directions, who show how to pass beyond sorrow. So in other words, here the request is, or the supplication is being made to the Buddhas who are throughout the 10 directions. So all the Buddhas, the request is to them not to die. Because pass beyond sorrow is the English for nirvana, which is the honorific, in this case, the honorific for not to die. So we're asking all the Buddhas everywhere, do not die. Then the Tibetan continues with, in order to bring about the benefits and happiness of sentient beings. So this is the purpose, the reason behind us making this request. Please continue to guide us, continue to teach the Dharma to sentient beings in whatever way they are receptive to, and continue to remain, and this is now the next point, to remain not passing into nirvana for as many eons as the number of minute particles there are in the universe. So continue to remain amongst us as guiding us human beings until we attain our own liberation and enlightenment. And over this course of time, other beings will be born from the lower realms and attain a human rebirth. Others will fall from the formless realm and attain a human rebirth. And eventually they too will attain precious human rebirth. So therefore, please remain until each and every being is able to access your teachings, as well as not just access them, but be guided to cultivate all the Dharma realizations within. And then the Tibetan concludes with the supplication. So this then is the meaning of the supplication that behind the words that are recited.
Don't know she said to Yomare in a Kurang Dushin and Yangal Suitin Gorwa, Dineza Daja, Nanzu Simjan Tam, Sanji Gova, Matu Yebado, Kurangi and Nanzulia, and Tabata Tamji Kimiko to Tabla Lam Yamle Jimba Duenche, Manzu in a dingy, Taba Tamji Kimiko to Yagi Dondala, and Yamlam Jimbati Pat Duenche. And then some gentlemen just sang you go from Mato, you do Shuruches, just then a Shuruches and lying table, a bang a dinner, Gushep the Chine Pashu years, the Shuruches, I don't know.
Well, meaning then in brief and really reiterating so that when you do this practice, you can do so with sincerity and intent and thereby accumulate the most virtue. So we're recognizing that the Buddhas, whilst you are beyond the state of uncontrolled death, please remain. And please remain not just for the duration of my lifetime, but remain until myself and each and every single mother sentient being has attained their own enlightenment. And don't merely remain, but remain fulfilling your purpose, which is to teach and skillfully guide us to achieve our own enlightenment.
The nation, Danganjulia, Yangal made a sword with some down to some dangores and some down had the Lagor, whether some dana. Taganes some dangores in the Sanye said, Delia, Nyomo Bachaza, Bantin, Gun Hamje, Ban, Yundan Hamje, Top Tower in Za, and the Jiggy Rawame by Linu, Rawame by Shiet, and Sanye, Yomares, Mevaza, that's some Sanye said, Azuye. And Jamni Temba in Zang as the Simja Tam, Duma said, and the U to be Tablan Dembe, Denge, Lam, that Dembo Choto Gubare, Dineza, that Sanje said, Manzulia, Simja Tam, Sanje Kova, Mato Yubado, and the Tarpata, Tamje Kimbo, Kova, Toya, Nyam Lamrim, Jimba Duenche, and the shoe, didn't shoe in the bear, Hore, Shuroche, the nigger shoe, Anzulia, Nyam Lamrim, Nanzuin and Yamlansun, Temba Nashin, Nyamsulene, Yamlan Tarshin, Sanjoko, Topa Chigi, Sampi, Dushin, some dango race or the name some down do that gave up out of me by Sago Regire. Carson, Sanji, you could indicate Jengor water, Sanji, Yangal, Sanji, the Nigi, Lamdini, Kingers, Sanji, Indente. And the Nea and Tarba Sosugi. Koyu Dunga Talatre, Tarbata Tamjiki, Tomiki, Manzuki, Yamlin, the Chiginsi, Tomiki, Dumba, Donya, Dumbaki, Gigorwa, some. The other Antigu, my Simjan Tamjiki Dunda, said the Simjan Tamja sometime you do, then Simjan Tamjiki Dunda sometime you do, and the Kawa Gachimasago, it's the Denisian and Yangal Bido Shushi, Shu Dunroche, Manzuin and Yamlin Chigi, Sibi Dushin, sometime you do, and the Sangi Kuson Tuso, and then Jambiki, Tonya Kasan, and the Jambi, and the Delia, and the Sunam Chiksagorwa, and Jigisangi. Sumba Najing on the Yamlin Chase, Tarbata Tamjiko, Toba Chikin Sempiki, then Yamlin Che, doing you Dumbakia, Taba doing you, Taba said, Topiki said, doing you Dumbakia, Tisuena Gawarawa. They are Ranchibu Maimba, Semjan Tamje, Sanje, Tamjiko Dona, Semjan Tajas, Koyu Dungal, Sanjiko, Matoki Bardo, some died, that is delay Gacha sometimes Merwa, Dineza, Dushin, some Danguries, Dinez something young Midash. Shuro chase and so what they buy in the Nepal bottom of a chagor, which is that Dinis some of these Dangore said, that's some down at the Sungor one.
For engaging in any practice, but such as this, For to be virtuous depends on one's motivation. For to be extensively virtuous depends on the strength, the depth and breadth of one's motivation. So the way to engage in this verse, similar to all others, is to, through already having reflected on many topics of the Dharma, to bring these to the forefront of one's mind and then make a sincere supplication. So here we recognize that a Buddha is a Buddha because of the endeavors they've engaged in for countless lifetimes. Cultivation of the wisdom of sufficient strength that led to the complete abandonment of the afflictions together with the seeds and imprints. And combining with their cultivation of wisdom, they also cultivated deep and sincere love for each and every mother sentient being and compassion for each and every mother sentient being, so that through this union of bodhicitta and the wisdom realizing emptiness, this being became a Buddha. With that deep respect arising within us, faith in the qualities of the Buddha, respect for their qualities, we give rise to a deep determination to become just like them. And with this deep determination, a commitment to turn away from harmful ways of thinking, afflicted ways of thinking, and embrace firmly wholesome ways of thinking. So when we are requesting the Buddhas to remain, we are making the commitment. I'm asking you to stay and to teach, and I will not only receive these teachings, but I will cultivate them within, and I will strive to become just like you. And I will do so because not only for my own peace, but so that I can help others ever more, and I can help them ever more skillfully. So through thinking in this way, extensive virtue is accumulated. So firstly, one generates, through recalling the qualities of Buddhas, a deep faith and respect in them and their qualities. That cultivates virtue. Then we lead that to bring about a determination to cultivate those same good qualities within us. Cultivate the varying paths in order to attain enlightenment ourselves. That too then leads to the accumulation of extensive virtue. And we explicitly commit to striving to develop spiritually not solely for our own inner peace, but so that we can be of ever more help to others. We can assist the Buddhas in their endeavors to help all sentient beings. So this breadth and depth of one's aspiration behind the supplication leads to extensive virtue being generated.
Ani chuju kolo ko sowa deba nyangale mi deba sowa deba se dushine gewa sa shabare da gewa dia ani ngo kya de semja tamji gi tondal ya ngo kya ge de sinza ngo ya la se sungro din ma.
Through these 6 of the 7 limbs, prostration, offering, confession, rejoicing, requesting, and now supplication, extensive merit has been accumulated. That merit then is now to be dedicated. So we come now to the 7th limb.
Tangowe yanlani chasawa dan sheso ye tsije jikde gongi yanla dugi gewe tsune geza tamje semjan tamje dan tumodo jede zobe janshu yu gyur dumba drape ngwebe namya mizeba os.
Reading from the text, the limb of dedication is set forth in the stanza. All the roots of virtue represented by the previous 6 limbs are made the common property of all sentient beings and never come to an end, since they have been dedicated with strong aspiration as causes of complete enlightenment.
The
verse from the King of Prayers, whatever little merit I've accumulated by prostrating, offering, confessing, rejoicing, requesting, and supplicating, I dedicate it all to enlightenment.
공기 양라 주기 기회 천년에서도 공기 양라 주세대 이제 차사와 최고부와들과 차사와 최바 디바샤바 개발 지수를 추주고로 그냥 무서워 대바세디 데니 이제네 개와 사바디 있어라 개회 천년에서도 디마세 디 멤비게 산다양도 개와 먹고 사베 개와 차상서다 데니게 양라 주요권에 사시베 개와체 데니 멤비게다 디가스 메베 내가 샤나야 개와 사시베다 간저기 개와가만에 다디바도 개와 가세 사샤바이나 개와디에서 월다 디순에 개외자와 탐지에서 제 개와 다댕아 저기 양라 둔주권에 개와 사바레 디 멤비게다 개와가만에 다디바도 개와 가세 사샤바이네 도시네 개와 사샤바 차상서 안 가르치네 탐제 아니 가르치네 샘제 탐제다 투모도 랑 찍부 된다 삼마다지 샘제 탐제 랑다 샘제 탐제 아니 투모도 조배 자주 산지 고방 토벌쇼 산지 고방도 유르유어 쇼 세데 안도시네 유유어 듬바 잡베 베스 셈을 많은 비치기 듬바 숙체 뭐지네 야도시네 샘제 탐제기도 산지 고방 토벌 유르유어 쇼 세데 몰람 자고래지 gyurgyurdo dumba chabe ngöbe se jua.
So here we can immediately start with the commentary to the verse from Lama Tsongkhapa. All the roots of virtue represented by the previous 6 limbs. So this then again refers to what we have been covering over the last 4 or so sessions. All the virtue accumulated from prostration, offering, confession, rejoicing, requesting, and supplicating, all of this virtue, and then we see at the beginning roots of virtue. So there's a plural, and that plural indicates not just the virtue that we've accumulated through the virtue that has been accumulated through this 7-limb practice, but the virtue that we've accumulated previous to this, throughout this life. And in fact, the virtue that we've accumulated in lives previous to this. All of this virtue, represented, all of the roots of virtue, represented by the previous 6 limbs, are made the common property of all sentient beings. In other words, when we come to dedicate, we do so explicitly, not only for my own welfare, but for the benefit of all other sentient beings without exception. Never come to end. Since they have been dedicated with strong aspiration as causes of complete enlightenment. So in the Tibetan, the causes for complete enlightenment comes right here, after common property of all sentient beings. So the dedication is explicitly for each and every sentient being, not just myself, not just some, but all, to attain a complete freedom from suffering and the perfect state of enlightenment. And with that, dedication is made with a strong aspiration. So the Tibetan here is particularly intense. So strong is kind of an average word, but you rather know maybe an intense aspiration, and even aspiration is a bit weaker, maybe an intense determination. So really deep, heartfelt, sincere dedication is made for the sake of all sentient beings. And this expression, all sentient beings, includes us, whether it's explicitly mentioned or not.
Andinegi da simje tamje sanjo ko ban tobi gyur sho si malam jaire and da digang ya so so rangi delia and chik nemba ja mangwe ro de dinegi ke wa sa cha ba dela dine an zemlingi na la ya ma shu tamje an shi je an chik mi chasal ya pe chen le ne be samba na chewe samba tamje shi ne an jam ni ji gyule je je an chik ma shu de shi wa sho se de ke wa de la de ne ki shi wa sho sam da da de ne ge ke wa sa ba de la de ne an de zem lin da la ne yam ji jian ji an ji ge meng wu ji ya me da dun zhuo de cha sa le ne yam ji ji ze ne yam ji ge xi ne an zhuo sim jian de ji di yi de dian ba sho se da de ne ge an ji ge lun ba ga xie le an chu luo dang an ji ju hui chu be ge 강아 먹고 치리게 되니게 강아지게 시제 안 심장담제 디기데 대바 용어 쇼스 비기 다 되게 소소라 다셈 몰음 제여도 되게 강 개체시 되네 심장 탐제는 상요고 화마도게 봐도 아니 디기데 대바 쇼스에 심장 탐제 아니 상요고 화도 규규와 쇼스 비 되게 삼다가 제가 소식이 몰음 강 개체 투둡때 뭐가 돼야 되도시네 삼담에나 다 다들이야 술좀마다 된 차살 또 강토도 시고로 와대.
When one dedicates in the manner explicitly stated here, but one can also include in one's dedication, dedicate the merit towards the suffering in the world that one has observed, the suffering that touches one. And in this way, the dedication won't be dry, but will be sincere and heartfelt. So perhaps one can dedicate that wherever there is conflict, where there is warfare between nations, where there is conflict between groups of people, or where there is conflict and violence between communities, where there's conflict and violence within a home or within families, may all of this come to an end. Rather, may love and compassion abide within beings. And where beings are suffering from illness, whether humans or animals, may that suffering come to an end. May no being have to suffer in this or any other way again. So in whatever illustrations of suffering one has observed, either in relation to oneself or others, where this touches you, include that in your dedication, as it will ensure your dedications are made with greater strength, with strong aspiration. And also where one has come to see the great benefits that the Dharma brings into your life, dedicate so that all beings can cultivate quickly the causes that will lead them to meeting the Dharma and to coming under the care of a fully qualified spiritual teacher, to recognize them as such and to strive to accomplish their teachings. And in this way, may all beings quickly come to cultivate the causes for enlightenment, and may those causes bring about that fruition as quickly as possible. And in this way, you personalize the dedication, leading to your dedication being more sincere and heartfelt.
디니게다 dimbatrabe ngwebe namya misebawo namya misebawo semjen tamji sanjo go tobe gyugyo sho se dinengo bainza semjen namya misebawo tamadila 제 남야 미세바wo se semjen tamji sanjo go tobe gyurngo wa inza 다딩 아주 디니게 ngwa jashi gewadi semjen tamji sanjo go tobe 마도게 봐도 조금 말해서 제가 두신에 비셔다 니고래 제가다 되니게 미세보고서 되나지 숨어.
The final words in Tibetan, Geshe read now. So we have our second line of Lama Tsongkhapa's commentary, and never come to an end. So through dedicating in this way, never come to an end, or literally never be exhausted, the virtue, the merit that you are dedicating will never be exhausted, will never come to an end until the aspiration behind the dedication has been fulfilled. And that aspiration, whilst expressed in many maybe categories, is all held together by the desire for all beings to become Buddhas, for all beings to attain their own enlightenment. So therefore, until each and every sentient being has attained their own enlightenment, this virtue that you are dedicating will never be exhausted, or will never come to an end.
달비 지게 템바 신 제네 쇠는 유풍보 빠도 매바 진도스 진노사.
Lama Tsongkhapa then continues, if you thus develop an understanding of the meaning of those words and slowly do as was taught without allowing your mind to wander, you will gather immeasurable heaps of merit.
Denegi Chosa Yanla Dumbigi, that Denegi Tsikti so a Tsik, the Data Tsik, Didagi, Duens, Denegi de Jingma, Tsik, the Sugu Dunda, the Pa Hakowache. Dina Hakowache, Yi Shendo Mayawa said the same day Namia Chanela, Matanwache, Tsiki Dunda del Pa, Samje, and debut Duens and Tsikti. Le Jigli, Duman, Tiki Dundal Party, Lola Chayala, Younger Tiki Dodona, Lola Chatu, Kalakawa. She said in the debut Tiki Gili, Dunje, Dundal, some Daduch and some Dutch Dungores, Jiggy Tembashi, Chiena, the Nigger Dumbaina, and the Sunam Yukumbo, about the Sunam, they must be Chimbosagri, or that.
So near the end of the first line, those words then refers to the words of the verses of the 7 Lam prayers, so the 7 verses there. Lama Tsongkhapa is here in this paragraph telling us explicitly how to practice. So the way he's telling us to practice, in this case in the 7 Lam prayers, but we can take this more generally, is to do so slowly. Do not do so in a rushed manner. Do not do so at pace, but do so slowly, because then you'll be able to do as was taught. In other words, with the meaning of those verses arising in your mind, or rather reciting slowly, you will have the time to generate the meaning as was taught. Do as was taught without allowing your mind to wander. So doing it slowly, you can keep your attention, and when your attention wanders off, you can bring it back and then continue with where you were before you got distracted. And in this way, you'll gather immeasurable heaps of merit. So the way we are being guided by, or rather instructed by Lama Tsongkhapa to do our practice, is to emphasize quality rather than quantity or pace. Konda kala sasin chusi tubanya chusi kyabo kuba ba suwore dunda ji tata suwore jena di dadi de sangju malam de su ba dangring bu dangjen ne ba ji nianbu ji dang nianbu shuore nianba dangjen de dungore sangju malam se wa so de sangju malam sugore se gore ji de sangju malam ko de de ruwa sangju di sai wo de ko dang je ya de. And this advice from Lama Tsongkhapa, we as monks in Serichay Monastery, we have the opportunity to put it explicitly into practice, in that every year a week is set aside where the entire monastic community comes together and recites the 7 Lam prayer together, not just once, not just several times, but nearly continuously for an entire week. Recitation one after the other. And we start early, getting up maybe at 2:30, starting at 3, and recite it slowly once after the other until maybe about 7 a.m. when we take a break for an hour or so, then recite again until we have lunch, and then take a break again, and then recite all afternoon until supper, and then recite again until late into the night. So this process we engage in for an entire week, and through reciting it both slowly and with repetition, it gives us time to keep reflecting on the meaning, going ever deeper into this. And this we do each and every year.
제가 안주기 소에 뒤주 따다들 셀메자 산이야. 양 뒤주 집벌에 둔다 지금 안주 뒤주다 소야 돼 뒤주 집지게 할 수고. 건조기다 상주만 되고 조 점매 점매 몰람세 줘래. 야와 점매 몰람 뒤조치네. 현在된 거를 뒤조치 안 건두치네. 집지게 님이 뒤주 질 수고라서. 점매 몰람데. 조 점매 몰람데 된 거래지. 조 They ding anzu de serjede so sanjo malam dingores ni shanda bis dingores ma sherwa da didan düsü chibu chigyang sermela karu dingores jambe malam de so che imbeji shanda dingor chibar jambe malam so che dang de chibu chi düsü chibu chigyang so gor donda chigrela.
And during this week there are other prayers and practices that are recited, but primarily it is the King of Prayers. Then the other college within Seta Monastery, Seta Main, during that same week, they also do a retreat similar to ours, but rather than the emphasis being on the King of Prayers, there's a Maitreya prayer, I'm not sure of its name, but Maitreya prayer that they primarily recite and meditate on.
구신 소와 대바 이랑 안이 초사바 인라 대시는 주다 되네야 초사 집상세지 셰와 제단의 초사바디 차사와 변의 차차와 최보포와 아니 개발을 지소 이랑 가서 냥알림이도 소와 대바 되게 한 최교로 고르체 소와 대바 제사다 아니 네 초사바지 그래서 이랑 지수 이랑 제바디 초사바지 that Tuyewa China, Sosa, Dipjas in Europe, Sosa, Pada, Dibaja in Europe. Jezada, Chasawa, Chebo Pua, and Gewala Chisuira Cheba, and Chuyuholo Gorogoa, Yangalimido, Soa Deba, said, Daddy, Sosa, then Dibashaba said, Yoruba did, then Dibajan said, Dibajon said, Chagorova, Jeza, Dibasha, Shabani, Dibajon said, Jezadelia. 지난 방안적이디 야라 뒤인디 봐 추고시게지 니나를 뒤로 그래서 지난 뭐 나디 소사와제 디버샤바디 디버종와세 지사 소사 집자세 도신.
Lama Tsongkhapa then continues. He divides the 7 limbs into their own individual limb to show their primary function. So, continuing with the text, 5 of these limbs, prostrating, offering, requesting, supplicating, and rejoicing, belong to the accumulation of the collection of accumulations. So, in other words, these 5 limbs lead to the accumulation of merit. And then Lama Tsongkhapa continues with confessing purifies obscurations. So 5 lead to the accumulation of merit or the accumulation of virtue, and 1 is focused on the purification of non-virtue or obstructions.
이랑기 초치스 제수 이랑 세들이야 니용으로와 랭기 개발의 제수 이랑 제바다 랑기 개발의 제수 이랑 제바 니용으로와 제가 이랑기 초치 랑기 개발라 가와 공반이 개와 빼와세요. 제가다 랑기 개발라 지수 이랑 제바들라 이랑 제바들라 개발 지수는 현지 개발 지수 이랑 제바도 소소라는 게 개발 지수 이랑 제바 니용거래스 제가 소소 랑기 개발 지수 이랑 제바디 개와 빼와세 디 빼와세 가서는 랑기 개발이 뭐 공부했던 거래 제래 제가 랑기 이랑기 초지 랑기 개발라 가와 공반이 개와 빼와당 것이 다디 파 마저 개와디야 숙철던 거래 제래.
Then Lama Tsongkhapa takes of these limbs, he takes one and looks at it in a little more detail, that of rejoicing. Because rejoicing can be done, as mentioned earlier, both towards those other than oneself, as well as to oneself. When one rejoices in the good qualities of others, one accumulates virtue. So that is the meaning of what we saw in the first sentence, rejoicing belongs to the collection of accumulations. But then Lama Tsongkhapa continues with one aspect, or maybe a further aspect of rejoicing. The cultivation of joy in one's own virtue multiplies the virtue. So when one rejoices in one's own virtuous endeavors, one's own virtuous good qualities, this serves to multiply the virtue, or to express that differently, to strengthen, or the meaning of multiply is to strengthen the virtue that one is accumulating. There, Lama Tsongkhapa spoke about the 6 limbs, 6 of the 7 limbs. First 6 to do with accumulation, 1 was to do with 5 to do with accumulation, 1 to do with purifying, and 1 to do also both accumulating and multiplying. Then he comes to the final limb of dedication. By means of dedicating, the virtues of collecting, purifying, and multiplying, however small, are multiplied manifoldly. And Geshe also read that. And what would normally come to an end after producing a temporary effect is made inexhaustible.
And Dimase Negapsu, Dango Majabana Negap Debu to Pa Junjima, Seduina, Jeza, Moa Jabana, Negapsu Debu, Chungne, Seba Jua Digiya, and Namia Meseba, Nick Namia Meseba, Junjubu, some Jatamja Sanjoko, Matu Badu, Neturi Esset, Nubadi Nigore Esset.
Lama Tsongkhapa is explaining the purpose of dedicating. By means of dedicating, the virtues of collecting, so the accumulations of merit, and then purifying, so that of confession, and multiplying, so where one rejoiced in one's own endeavors, one's own virtuous qualities, however small, are multiplied manifoldly. So here, the translation is fine, but he's going down into the meaning of multiplying a virtue. It really means the virtue is being strengthened, is becoming more powerful. And what would normally come to an end after producing a temporary effect is made inexhaustible. So this was the same as we saw above in the context of the limb of dedicating. That because one is dedicating not merely for something temporary, or not only for one's own benefit, even only one's own enlightenment, but for the enlightenment of each and every mother sentient being. It is for this reason that the virtue is made inexhaustible, in that until each and every single sentient being has attained enlightenment, this virtue will keep its potency, keep its power or potential.
Di Jimba Dami, Dewu, the Benjo of Junwashu, Molam Dizam Javaina, Jishin Benjo, the Cedelia Juyungres, did tell Tusona, Digi Jimba Dami, Nipa Zosar, the Benjo, the Cedelia Tusona, Benjo, to the Zosare. The Java Chima Dubsene, then Zosar in Jamai Pamere. She's not done on the Jimba Dagi, Jimba Sunumson, Semjan Tamja Sanjo Gobo to be Yurgua, some more Jebshabena. Semjan the Jasan Maji Badu, Sangi Masa, but gave nobody had, gave nobody Yungores, Zomares, or Jipando Yungores, or Jizan Negap, so Jebu Chung ne, Sever Juanam, said Jimbin, Jebu Jimba Chinyam, Jimbata, Sunam Sa, this everybody, 당고와디 세들이야 디기 중화 쇼하세나 개와 치마 중화 쇼스베 세베나 디데부 중에도 다 세가 잘해서 지산 데니게 세바 규루고 데니게 개와디다 먼저 데네 망고마체 샘전 탐제 산요 고방 토벌 쇼스 되비 귤규와 쇼스 ngo바이나 남녀 세기 말 샘전데 산요 고방 마소게 봐 마세바제 뉴베데 라고레스 당고레스 두스고레.
To talk a little further about, and what would normally come to an end after producing a temporary effect is made inexhaustible. So we take a very simple illustration of if one practices generosity, and before doing so one generates a good motivation, and then thereafter dedicates, through this act of generosity, may I attain a wealth. Then when one may experience the ripening effect of that karmic seed that you've just created, perhaps in this very life. And then that virtue is exhausted because the virtue was dedicated towards, that potential or that strength was exhausted perhaps later in this life. Or if not in this life, perhaps the next life. But then it is exhausted. But if one dedicates more skillfully, and dedicates until enlightenment is attained, and not merely my enlightenment, but the enlightenment of all beings. May beings have, for example, an abundance of material comfort, until all beings attain their own enlightenment, then that same virtuous deed, the karmic seed that was created, will retain its potency or strength for as long as one has dedicated. So in other words, until each and every being has attained their enlightenment. So in that way, instead of the karmic seeds created having an effect that is temporary, for example, experience in this or a future life, its potency, its power, its potential will remain until all beings have attained enlightenment, and therefore it can be said to be inexhaustible.
사바다 자와다 배신 미세버체바 수모 세되다 야나 뒤바이나 야 개와 사바치체 데데치 차사와 쳐버부와 안에지기 추유 양알미데바 소와데바 추유로 고고와데 개와 사바체 데네 제 디버샤바디 안에 샤베얀 샤바 사바세데 그래서 장바세데 데네 배신 세되 모아체바디 다 개와 미세 배와제바세 지산디 양라디 쇠남디 뒤나 아니 사바다 장바 배와 숨나디 그래 숨모세디.
Lama Tsongkhapa then concludes with, in brief, there are three. So referring to the 7 limbs, these can be divided into 3. First is accumulating. So that's what we saw above. Prostrations, making offerings, requesting the Dharma to be taught, making supplications for the Buddhas to remain, and then rejoicing in the virtuous qualities of others. These all come under accumulating. Purifying then is the limb of confessional, of confessional. And then thirdly is multiplying and making inexhaustible. Multiplying then refers to rejoicing in one's own virtuous qualities, and in this way one strengthens one's virtuous qualities, and making it inexhaustible refers to that of dedication.
심지어 탐제 안주 상계 고마도 예바도다 상계 고마 토고도 제사다 심지어는 저 토발라 안주 람띵게 냠릭 짐바띵게 고고도 디자다 상계 결함마도 민도 상계 결함게다 안주야 심지어 탐제야 타바다 탐제 기비 고바도에 람 냠릭 짐바 뛰제 안지야 안주 차상 띵기 대와 탈바 마도 예바 탈 탐제 기비 고바 마도 예바도 상계 결함 슈체네 냥알미 대와 취마도 바 슈체네 안주야 최선 슈로체 세지 노체네 도르드네 삼당아서 두신 삼다제 데네 삼다위 개와디기 아주 개와강 사바디 탐제 안에 심제 탐제 상계고 고마토비 귤규와쇼 세제 모아자디 두신 삼다디 단다닝보디 디레당아서 되게 쇼가셔야돼. 다닝고 결로 마셔야돼. 다 맨제기 거셔야래샤.
To summarize then what we've looked at is that with the recognition that each and every sentient being, no matter who they are, has the capacity to become a Buddha. And not only that, whether they know it or not, they have a deep yearning for the experiences of the state of enlightenment, namely the state of lasting peace. That's never punctuated by even a moment of pain or difficulty. All beings desire this state. All beings have the capacity to achieve it. And to do so, just like ourselves, all beings require a skilled guide, a guide who's skillful in teaching the Dharma and guiding beings in how to cultivate the Dharma within. It's through transforming one's own mind in this way that we will achieve enlightenment. So therefore, we make the request to please teach us the Dharma and remain amongst us suffering beings, guiding us, teaching us skillfully. And we dedicate all this virtue to the fulfillment of that aspiration, that each and every being achieves enlightenment. So that's in brief what we've looked at this morning. Then this afternoon we'll look at the final preparatory practice, that of offering a mandala. And if you have questions then please feel free to ask. Sybil?
I've got two questions. I just wondered whether when Sarah J does its week-long 21-hour-a-day practice of the 7 limbs with the King of Prayers, do they concentrate just on the 7 limb verses in the King of Prayers or the whole King of Prayers?
The entire King of Prayers is slowly recited. So not just the 7 limb parts at the beginning, but the entirety.
Right. And doing it slowly like that, just like... could Geshe teach on that one time, please? Or could we ask formally?
So firstly, the entire King of Prayers is recited slowly like that, so that as the monks progress in their studies, they will understand ever more of those verses, and therefore be able to reflect on more of it. And then in terms of your specific request, yes, in the future I will teach it.
That's one question. Thank you.
Okay.
So it sort of means, I didn't really realise, but it sort of means that Geshe has to teach the whole path, right? Right up to 2 stages and everyone. So anyway, that's what I've just realised. But the second question is, when it says, it just sort of struck me, and it's like a new idea that at the bottom of page 49 in the book, where it talks about the roots of virtue represented by the previous 6 limbs are made common property of all sentient beings. Now when you do that, can you do that just by dedicating it? And is there any way that actually, apart from what you do, by your thoughts about sentient beings, is there some way that even, crazy relatives or incredible meaning leaders, that when you think of them, they're able to have that common property in a way?
So just to repeat the question in very brief, through the is there any way that through the power of our dedication, so us as ordinary people, through the power of our sincere dedication, can it actually have an impact on the continuum of others directly?
Yeah, is there any way that that idea of their common property be owned by them? Can there be a way that they own that? Because it's this word, this idea of common property was sort of struck me as something powerful. Is that just metaphoric or is it in actuality?
So can I express it like this? Yeah. Can they actually experience the ripening results of my dedication? So I've accumulated the merit, I'm dedicating it to them. Can they actually experience directly that result?
Or can they, that result or that common property, because
Okay.
Sorry.
No, good.
Quelle est la mixation di Buddhist Lobsang di total level in mixation e di so che non se ne concreti quindi molto piacere se conchi nella tocchi che reazione che c'è anche Session dans tout le monde, tout j'étais. Et Dieu, tout le monde, tout j'étais, dit qu'on est. Et not so, if she's not so good, we felt that, we felt the make it. Just simple, sweet. Not so, there was that, more. Then it not so, not so pink, come, young and Zaman ki pumpuchi, sitsinchi, consola noje. Dene nato gereta, sami di, gewa di, consola mersu, gewa di mindu, consola mersu, nyonki lebe.
Dadi miavas kaya marwa. Tendeya marwa, kiawa ngāngzu kiawa de ngāngzu ngōwa kiakorwa. Chesante ngāngzu le mōngwa banan di devu nipa de ngāngzu ligirwa. Dan mōngwa banan de amsa neba chile pene di yaku yongwa shosungwa na neba de dhabi ngeba yo marwa. Tendende, lamsa di yo marwa de chesan. Mōngwa banan sosuke mōlam kiwe nipa de chige 같이 누가 같이 채베나 뭐바나 셴리아 판도 제가 용투로와
it's laptan bitrikidu not so moetedu gewa den windu not so semla mingides not so yongides yine not so shemperdan namdu kendo shemperdan tenla not so gewa de che jetsa not so sosoran gewa de tukdu not so yonte yake dodu not so shemperdan namdu jowa sesam present consultant akle not so gewa de dikenjene consul pengide consul pengo tokide digena
다디 제 소수게 겨와 사바네 소수게 기 니비 뜻기 마오바네 샬라 펜바 용구로와 돼
shemper데 코란데
마셴바데 데 수이나다 데 다디미 다가라는 레투에 용고스카요 말와 제가 마오바네 데네 용시기로와 베네가 주게도 삼다데 베네서름 슈비칼 서름 주결혼 디체쇼사 송어데 어디 서버체 깔레지네 남산 냠는지 망부지 리교로 와 내가 통수스큐 버려와 나 주로버지기 결혼디 제고라람네 대년나 많이 된데 하고 여러 와데 그래서 디 가르스네 고노도 냠마 몰람지 니비 뜻기 다 미샬이야 결혼되는 냠는지 디 제고라비도 오라솔라소선 당라 휴신 디 용거로 와 베네 서버음시나 자음시로다 자음시게 깔롭 찍식 두 제고라서 송여도 남산 배 인데 있어도 배 직당 당어 지고치는 지고로와 디고는 녀마게 선음 사회게 모와접에 디기 누비 뜻기 다 누바 디기 뜻기 고스시안에 페버트 두고로와 당아 주기 지저 결혼 디지에서네 아가 디세 메가 공메 세디 용루와 디딩아 소리 디 누베요 말에 매바지 디견와 디스 베드로 디로 시리다
서포스 이네가 그리 서포스 그래서 컨sulti con le doppe che appaiono ma prima doppe di then it gets into external. Then it kiwa ngoma, naso, and the super, and say the Lamrim, church also, then it come being naso like, Gewa Ramida, Merso.
개와 남에게 출에 연하면에로 더 소수 개와 사제 마음바나 되네 판바 연구로 와제 되네 연구래 되네 되네 연구시기래 나 저기 미질이야 곧 지금 셈바뱅 한번 주셔왜 내가 지금 개와 줍지 다 몰람 되지 그 유어쇼스네 남사 태가 남사 줄투고요 나 남사대 갈래가 보러와 제자니 내가 저기 뉴버르시고 튕고로 와다 이네 뉴버 튕고래 그런 기기 녀마게 되네기야 레기 사세비기 곧 그런 개왕함이 몰람 유튜브 두비나 두고요 내가 지금 강아지 두야야 말와네
So I spent some time with Geshe to try and get the answer the clarity of answer that perhaps people are looking for. Because the general answer that's given is if we dedicate in relation to, let's say, a person or an event, can it really have an impact on that person, a direct impact on that person? Then the general answer is, it's not certain. So, which would be a way of saying, it may not, it's difficult to see. But then to go deeper into that, it comes down to us as practitioners needing a far broader as well as far-sighted outlook. Not looking at what we observe in terms of manifest suffering, not looking at that from the perspective of merely the here and now, but rather having a far broader as well as far-sighted perspective. Because what is ripening now is largely ripened, or is ripening into the magnitude of our dedication is not going to do anything. But that little bit, I express it not so well. But that is the bit that is not so certain. What is much clearer is that through the quality, whatever quality of our dedication, but the greater the quality, the greater the virtue that's accumulated. This virtue that we have accumulated is abiding on our mind. When those karmic seeds ripen, they ripen in our experience. But that doesn't mean that we alone or ourselves alone experience that result. Because perhaps the creation of the virtue is made in dependence on others, but certainly in terms of the question, it's made the dedication is made in dependence on others. And here by others, we're not talking generally all sentient beings, but if your question, you are specifically dedicating to a person. So a dependency is created in terms of this dependency with them. So when this virtue ripens, perhaps in a life a long time from now, perhaps much nearer, that too is not certain. When that ripens, it ripens in your experience. But the expression now of your own growing inner good qualities will have a greater than otherwise impact on that individual to whom you dedicated the merit. So the way they will receive the benefits of your dedication is not in their situation radically improving, but through them being far more open and receptive to you, who now has ever greater qualities. So how we can see that is in terms of the great beings in our world, His Holiness and Lama Zopa and so forth. When they give their students teachings, the students hear those teachings, take them to heart, and strive to apply them in their lives. And even when they've moved from this world, such as in the case of Lama Zopa, his students will be inspired by his intentional display of impermanence to make the most of what remains of this life. And what does that mean, making the most? to take the advice they have been given. In other words, these general teachings they've received, and put those into place, cultivate them in their hearts. So here we see the quality of the mind that in this instance Lama Zopa has cultivated through all his dedications, and thereby having an immeasurably different impact on people than someone else, such as ourselves. And furthermore, if we take and narrow it down to more specific, let's say the Lama Zopa in a previous life had a Dharma relationship with anyone here, and in that life Lama Zopa dedicated merit to this suffering being before them, yourself in a previous life. This life, that these two continuums come together. Lama Zopa is in this form, you're in the form you're in now, but there is this specific relationship created interdependently. You would have had whatever attitude you did towards Lama Zopa in that life, and he dedicated virtue specifically for you. In this life, his words carry even more impact on you. And in this way, in this life, you receive the benefits of his endeavors in last life. Perhaps that merit was created in relation to you. Certainly the dedication may have been created in dependence on you. And this dependency is then played out in this life by his words carrying far greater impact than they otherwise would have in relation to you. Okay.
Oh yeah, we need to do
So I know there are some questions, but lunch is to be served, so we can start with more questions this afternoon. Thank you.